we are in the studio now with Bob Clark, and he's going to be talking to us real soon in just a couple seconds here about the Sequim Prairie Grange, actually about the National Grange. But just before we do, we're just going to have one little quick announcement right here, and this is Rick Perry.
You're tuned to 91.5 KSQM Sequim.
Thank you, Rick. So, how are you doing, Bob?
I'm doing fine, Buck.
Thank you. So you got some information on the National Grange, and I believe has to do with when it was organized?
I can give you whatever you want to know as far as information of the Grange.
That's a pretty wide question. There's so much to know.
Well, I was lucky enough to be a state master of our Grange here in Washington State, and that made me available to go to National Grange as a delegate and then get elected to the National Grange Executive Committee. So I learned about a Grange. I've been to the national headquarters dozens of times. But
that's fascinating.
Let's start with the beginning.
Yes.
And in the beginning, I have to go back to 1865. President Lincoln had been assassinated, and Vice President Andrew Johnson was the new president. And during the early spring of that year, he realized that he wanted to have a report on the condition of the agricultural lands in the southern states because so many battles have been fought over the land.
And totally destroyed the farms.
Totally destroyed. Crops were destroyed and everything. So he contacted his Secretary of Agriculture, whose name was William Saunders, and asked Saunders if he could get a report to him within the next 6 months. And Saunders chose an employee of the Agricultural Department named Oliver Hudson Kelley. Oliver Hudson Kelley started out on his journey, and he journeyed through the South, and while he journeyed, he visited farms, took notes, kept a diary, and he, having been a Freemason, a member of the Masonic Lodge, he, as he traveled through the South, realized that there has to be some sort of organization that the farmers could organize similar to the Masonic organization so they could have a voice in Congress. And so he got one particular visit in the South. He was invited by a southern plantation owner to come for dinner. And he went to dinner, and as he stood on the front steps of the doorway into this mansion, the owner said, "You stay right there." And he went across to the fireplace, and he took down the sword over the fireplace, and he broke it in half. And Oliver asked him, "Well, why did you do this?" And he said, "I swore that I would kill the first Yankee that crossed the doorway into my man house." But he said, "I see by your ring you are a Mason, and I'm a Mason, and therefore I can't kill a brother." And Oliver carried that with him, and he got back to Washington, D.C., made his report to Saunders, and then he said, he talked to Saunders, who also was a Mason, and said, "We need to organize the farmers. The agricultural community has to have a voice in Congress." And so Saunders, Kelly, and 5 other men, 3 of whom were Masons, met on a weekly and monthly basis for the next year and a half. And one of the meetings, they went and they formulated what they were going to call the Patrons of Husbandry, which is now known as the Grange. And one of the times that he went to this meeting, his niece, his niece Carol asked him if she could go with him and attend the meeting, and he agreed. And she sat and listened to the men discussing everything, and then she asked if she could speak. And they gave her permission to speak, and she stood up and she said, "Gentlemen, your plans are very good for the organization, but," she said, "it will not succeed unless you include women in the organization." So from the time of the Grange's start, women held office in the Grange. In fact, there are 4 officers in our Grange that can only be held by women. No man can hold the 4 officers. And they organized a Grange, and as it happens, December 4th, which is today, 1867, is the birth date of the Grange when they had their first Grange meeting.
So
we're celebrating
188
our
years
155th
155th, yes.
our 155th birthday
And
tonight.
so were they the first organization to have women involved?
Definitely. In fact, in the National Grange Convention in 1872, and by that time, Granges had just sprouted up like mushrooms all over the country because the farmers recognized that they needed a voice in Congress. And so millions of people became Grange members up until the 1890s, and then I'll tell about that in a minute or two. But in 1872, at the National Grange Convention, the delegates to that convention voted for women's suffrage. And that was a resolution they sent on to Congress, which didn't get passed by Congress until 1922, when the amendment to our Constitution allows women the right to vote. And so it took a long time for Congress to realize what had to be done, but the Grange recognized it in 1872. Now, I mentioned the Grange was doing a lot of expansion all through the states and even into the West. And by 1890, they felt they were so strong that they chose to endorse a political candidate.
Oh.
And naturally, if you endorsed a political candidate, you could lose half of your membership.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they would vote for the other candidate, and that's what happened with the Grange. The Grange lost 2 or 3 million members in just a short time because of their endorsement. So after that, and since that time, there are no politics discussed in the Grange. We have political forums in the Grange, but if we have a political forum, we invite both the Democrat and the Republican
Absolutely.
running for the office.
And that's how I've known it.
Yeah. And so we do that, but you cannot discuss politics in a Grange, period. And it's stood its time real well. Then I want to come forward to 1942. World War II had just begun, and our state master at the time was a man by the name of A. Lars Nelson. He was our state master for 17 years in a row. And he appointed a state deputy master, who had all the powers that he did, to come into Clallam County to organize Granges. And the first Grange he attempted to organize was Sequim Prairie Grange.
Okay.
Well, when he came in, he found out, he came dressed in a suit and a tie, and he found out if he was going to speak to farmers, he had to speak to them in their own environment, and often he said he found himself standing knee-deep in cow manure.
Yeah.
So he had the habit of putting knee boots on so he could walk out into the barnyards and things and talk to the farmers. And he convinced, I think there were 50-some members of the original charter members of the Grange. My mother and father were charter members of that Grange. And it started in 1942. And I think over the years of the farmers that have been in there, and I knew all, Clem Fortman and his wife, George Spath and his wife, and Art Becker was the first master of our Grange, and Art farmed a piece of property that my father sold to Art right in the early 1940 or so. He sold Art 60 acres of our original farm, and Art farmed that. Plus he had the farm that's just off of the road to the south of the road after you cross the Dungeness River Bridge, the old schoolhouse.
Okay.
And
which
Art,
is now the museum, right?
Yeah, he was the first. Yes, right. And anyway, Ted, he organized that Grange, and then he went on, and a few days later, because our Grange is 1118, and a few days later he organized Crescent Grange, which is at Joyce, which is 1123. And as Granges get organized, they receive the very next number. And other deputies were working in other counties, so between 1118 and 1123, there have been 4 more Granges that have been organized elsewhere in the state.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, elsewhere in the state. And the Grange today is a very different organization. The people that were all farmers in the Grange at that time.
Originally, yes.
We, if you counted the farmers in Sequim Prairie Grange, we probably have 3 at the most. The rest are people just like you and me and people from town. And
from every walk of life.
Anybody can become a member of our Grange. And our Grange is extremely active. And we rent our halls out, and we have a lot of activities that not only are valuable to the public, but we also give generously to the public with every event we have.
Oh, absolutely.
And so we have a lot of people. They join mainly because we're doing something in the community.
And it's always community oriented. It's always
Right.
something to give to the people.
That's correct. And so it's been quite a journey in the Grange. And I'll talk a little more.
And so right now we're talking to Bob Clark. And so in 1880, was that when the election took place?
No, the elections were I don't know which candidate was running, but it occurred in the 1890s.
Oh, okay, because you mentioned that something happened in the 1880s, and you were going to get back to it. And I don't mean to take you from the course of what you were speaking about. It's just I wondered what that was.
Right. Well, let me first of all talk about the National Grange and their headquarters.
Absolutely.
Which is in Washington, D.C. We have the only building privately owned within the executive section of Washington, D.C.
I did not know that.
From the master's office, which is at the top of an 11-story building, you look right down into the front courtyard of the White House.
Wow.
And
that's pretty amazing.
Across from Lafayette Square.
And you were there. That was your job every day.
I've been there many times. I've toured the White House a couple of times. But anyway, the reason we have that building and the government can never condemn it and take it away is because back in the 1950s, we had two very powerful congressmen, two senators, Senator Warren Magnuson and Senator Henry Jackson. They were both
Grange members,
Masons, but they were also both Grange members.
Okay.
And they introduced a bill that passed Congress that declared this building to be out of bounds as far as the government was concerned. They couldn't condemn it and take it over. And so we're sitting there, little island in all the government buildings, but we're there.
And you're safe.
And we're safe. They can't take it away from us, period. So our national master right now is a lady, Betsy Huber, from Pennsylvania. And I know Betsy real well.
I don't think people realize that even now, the Grange Association has a seat in government.
Oh, yes. Now let's talk about some of the things the Grange has accomplished.
Yeah.
Not only here locally, but nationally. I've talked to several groups about the Grange, usually prospective members. We invite them to a meeting and I give a little talk. And I'll tell each one of them, you can't live a day of your lives in this community without using some of the benefits that the Grange acquires through congressional action and state legislative action. A good example is the school buses.
Yes.
Yellow school buses. And another thing we can pride ourselves in the Grange about is it always starts at the grassroots and goes up.
Well, back to the school buses.
It doesn't start as an idea from on high that comes down.
So people understand the school buses were not all yellow.
And they weren't all yellow.
They were different colors, and people didn't know what colors they were.
Yeah,
and the Grange...
First school bus I had was green in color.
And the Grange made it.
A lady in a Grange in Ohio hit upon the idea that school buses should have a uniform color nationwide.
Absolutely.
And she put the resolution into her Grange. They passed it. They put it in the Pomona Grange, which is the 5th degree of our order, and the county Grange, and they passed it. and then it went on to the Ohio State Grange, and they passed it, and then it became a bill that could be introduced in Congress by our lobbyists that we hire and have representing the Grange in Washington, D.C. That's a good example.
Absolutely.
In our own locality, if you turn on the lights, thank the Grange. The Grange in first initiative in our state, when initiative and referendums were first allowed, which was caused by the Grange, they drafted the bill to have initiative and referendums on the ballot. And the first one for the PUD, the lights came on. And so therefore, if you turn light on, think of the Grange.
And people don't know that.
If you have a fire and you call and the fire department shows up, you think of the Grange, because the fire department is a rural fire department. Real fire districts were all made through lobbying and state legislative action, and the bill was introduced by the Grange. And the last one that I can be really proud of is this: in this state, we do not have to declare our politics and get a respective ballot for either Republican or Democrat. We have what's called an open primary, and it's been challenged by both parties, and we went all the way to the National Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., and by golly, we won. The parties can't challenge us. This state will always, you can go and pick up a ballot and vote for either party. You can go down and vote for the man or woman of your choice. Whereas in other states, if you get a Republican ballot, you've got to vote Republican, period.
Yeah, which really narrows it down.
Yes.
We don't have that here. We have the open
primary.
Open primaries.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize just how much the Grange does and has done here, just like phone calls to Port Angeles.
Yeah.
Something simple like that.
We used to have long distance charge on a phone call to Port Angeles. And when we went before the Public Service Commission, Francis Pearson, who happened to be a Grange member, they said, they called the phone company in, and the phone company said, "Oh, we'll lose money. We can't do that." And the Public Service Commission at the time said, well, you're going to try it. We're not going to allow you to be in business if you won't try it. And they ended up, we not only got long distance from Sequim to Port Angeles, but we got Sequim all the way out to Joyce and Sequim back towards Gardner. So we got a much bigger range.
As it should be.
Right. And then another thing the Grange did, we came up with having box numbers for every mailbox. And that's another thing.
I didn't know that.
Rural delivery of mail. It was debated way back in the 1880s at National Grange. And a congressman from Pennsylvania said, let the farmer come in once a week and pick his mail up. And by golly, we got the bill passed. And so therefore, every time you see a mailman coming down your driveway and putting mail in your box, it's due to the Grange. So
wow,
that's
we really need to put all that on the wall in our Grange of all the things.
Yes.
We really truly do, because the Grangers don't even know all that.
Yeah. And right now our Grange is we just re-elected, or not re-elected, we elected a new master. Her name is Dorinda Becker, and she's going to have an installation of officers.
On December 14th.
On December 14th. At what time?
During the meeting.
After 7 o'clock, then.
after 7.
The meeting starts at 7 o'clock, and it's during that meeting,
Yeah.
which is the second Wednesday of the month,
Yeah.
that she will have the installation of the new officers.
Right. And Dorinda is well versed in Grange. She comes from a Grange family of 2 or 3 generations of Grange members. I think your grandfather, Olaf, was a Grange member. Yes.
Yeah, we were
sure.
really glad that she was voted in. As I've spoken to her many times, and she knows a lot about the Grange. I barely know anything. That's why I'm the secretary. Sorry, bad joke.
Well, the Grange is a very active place. Our hall is rented almost every day of the week.
Yeah.
Something's going on.
We
with the
just
Grange
had
Hall.
a sale, not a flea market, but that kind of thing, just
you had
a couple days ago.
Christmas bazaar just last Saturday.
Yeah.
And they did very well. I hope all the vendors did as well as the Grange did, holding the bazaar.
I believe they did. I believe that they enjoyed it and liked what happened.
Good, very good.
I just want to thank Bob Clark for being here today.
Thank you
and
very
hopefully
much.
we can have you back again.
Well, I'll try.
Okay, thank you. KSQM, 91.5 FM, KSQM.